Chapter 2. 1 week earlier, Saturday. An angel. Micah Gibson was an angel, and Kat had a job to do. Kat Jameson stared at the open Bible in front of her and sighed. She should have asked more questions, gotten a roadmap of how exactly she was supposed to connect with the one girl at the gym who seemed to loathe her. But how do you think to ask questions when the guy you'd thought was just a normal peer spread his celestial wings in your office and told you he was an angel? How did you think beyond the present when he told you the lights you'd been seeing were angels protecting people and that it was your job to witness to them, to save them? Kat still had no idea why she'd been chosen. She had claimed to be a Christian since high school when she'd given her heart to God at a service, but she'd certainly had her ups and downs on the journey. She'd pushed God to the side while she went through college and medical school. Sure, she'd attended a church service every couple of weeks, but not because she wanted to. Not because she had a burning desire to be in the presence of the Lord. No, she'd gone because Stella had asked her to. Stella had been the rock, the anchor, the one on fire for God. But now Stella was gone. And even after that, Kat couldn't say she was great at remembering to read the Bible every day. Now she wished she had been. Micah had said the end was coming soon, the rapture. The tribulation, and it was her job to tell as many people as possible about God, to save as many people as possible. But she wasn't even sure what that meant. People had been talking about the rapture for years, but no one knew much about it. Even the book of Revelation, which was supposed to give the most information on it, was incredibly hard to decipher. Was it literal? Metaphorical? Even the so-called experts she was Googling couldn't seem to agree. So how was she, a run-of-the-mill oncologist, supposed to have all the answers? Heaving another sigh, she pushed back from the table and put a kettle of water on the stove. Maybe tea would help clear her head. Tea always seemed to help, ease worries, relax her soul. Her mind wandered back through the years to the many times she and Stella had chatted over tea. The day Stella told her she was getting married, the day she'd said she was pregnant. It seemed that big discussions always happened over tea. How she wished Stella was here now to help her figure out what to do. Footsteps in the kitchen drew her attention to the entrance that connected the kitchen to the rest of the house. A moment later, Jordan's blonde head appeared in the doorway. A few days ago, Jordan Wright had been a stranger, a young, college-aged kid who'd traveled across the country to tell Kat that she'd seen her in a vision and God had a plan for her. Kat had thought she was crazy at first, but Jordan had known about the lights. She'd shared her own visions with Kat, seen her yelling at the sky, collapsed and crying under the window after Stella's death, things she could not have known, which made it harder to dismiss her. Then her mother had told her she spoke to Jesus as a young child, and Micah had revealed he was an angel. Suddenly, Jordan's story hadn't sounded so far-fetched. Not that Kat went around asking, but she didn't know anyone else who'd ever seen a real angel. So, Kat had offered Jordan a place to stay as long as she needed. She wasn't Stella for sure. No one could replace her best friend. But she was rather like the younger sister Kat had never had. "You making tea?" Jordan asked as she crossed to the table and dropped into the chair opposite Kat. She was already in her pajamas, checkered flannel pants, and an oversized t-shirt that said, "Tea trails begin here." But she didn't look ready for bed. Tiny lines spread out from around her eyes as if something was bothering her. Of course, it could just be the bombshell that Kat had dropped on her yesterday. Micah had said that Jordan was a part of this job Kat had to do, and she took it to mean that Jordan might not return to Texas before the rapture. Leaving for a visit and realizing you might never return home would certainly stress her out. "You want some?" Kat opened the cupboard and pulled out 2 mugs, but the question was more out of habit than curiosity. The girl's shirt declared her love for tea. "Please." "Did you get settled today?" Kat leaned against the gold-flecked marble counter as she waited for the whistle to sound. She'd set Jordan up in her guest room, which was cozy, though decorated simply. But that wasn't what she was asking Jordan. Not really, anyway. She wanted to make sure the girl was as comfortable as she could be, especially since Kat was little more than a stranger. Jordan's thin shoulders rose in a defeated shrug. "Yeah, I guess. I didn't bring much. Though I didn't know how long I'd be gone, I packed light. Most of my stuff is in a storage place back in Texas. It's kind of hard realizing I may never see it again or need it. Kat could relate. Though she hadn't had to leave her home, there were things that had been weighing on her since Micah revealed himself. Mainly all the things she had yet to do. I know. People always say that seeing Jesus is what we should want most in this world, but I have to tell you that I'm scared. I haven't done everything I wanted to yet. Of course, Micah hadn't told her how long they still had. She didn't know if he even knew the exact time. Maybe it was years, but she doubted it. If he had revealed himself to her, the time had to be coming soon. A tight smile formed on Jordan's lips. Yeah, I know. I'm so young, and even though I know I'm doing God's work, I still have regrets. The kettle whistled and Kat poured the water into the 2 oversized mugs before carrying them to the table. Anyway, Jordan blew the word out with a sigh. How about you? Find anything that will help us navigate this? Kat looked down at the open Bible. Not much. I'm trying to decipher Revelation, but I'm no biblical scholar, and even those who are don't always agree. I can't tell if these churches John mentions were only churches back then, or if what we are seeing today falls under them too. I mean, some things certainly fit. He says the Church of Ephesus hates evil, but they've forgotten their first love. I assume that means they've become legalistic and forgotten Jesus. We certainly see that in some who claim to be Christian. Then there's Smyrna, which is about people who claim to be believers but aren't. I'm sure we will see many of them. The Church of Pergamum is a little harder to decipher. John says they live in the shadow of Satan's throne, but still follow Jesus. Missionaries, maybe? Jordan asked as she lifted her mug and blew lightly into it. Or people who work in less than ideal situations hoping to share the gospel? Kat pursed her lips. I don't know, because then he says they indulge the Balaam crowd and put up with the Nicolaitans. I'm not super familiar with Balaam. Have you found anything about him? Yeah. Kat flipped back in her Bible to the book of Numbers. He was once a strong prophet of God. He was offered wealth to curse the Israelites, but he said he couldn't go against what God said to him, so he ended up blessing them instead. Confusion marred Jordan's face. I don't understand then. Why wouldn't we want to be like Balaam? Kat picked up her own mug and let the warmth roll down her arms. Because, evidently, he later found a way to get his wealth without cursing Israel directly. Peter says he enticed them to sin through idols and sexual immorality. So these people might be those who consider themselves believers but worship idols or engage in immoral behavior? Kat nodded and took a sip of her tea while she considered her answer. Maybe. We certainly see that today with people treating their electronics like idols and sex like holding hands. Jordan chuffed and turned her mug in a slow circle on the table. Yeah, you should have seen college. Even in Texas, where it's still fairly conservative, I know plenty of girls who slept with every guy they dated. She dropped her eyes to her mug and her voice grew quiet. Don't get me started on frat parties. Kat knew Jordan was thinking about her own encounter. She had been drugged and raped at a frat party, and while Kat knew Jordan hadn't wanted to be raped, she had been looking to hook up that night. Sexual immorality was prevalent all over college campuses. It had been, even years ago when Kat had attended. And it appeared worse now. It's rampant everywhere. How could it not be? It's pervasive in our movies and TV. Virgins are labeled as stupid or losers. I try to stay out of hospital gossip, but I've heard enough to know that it goes on there as well. You couldn't pay me enough to sleep in an on-call room unless it was disinfected thoroughly first. She shuddered as she thought of all the hospital employees she had heard use the on-call rooms as quick hookup places. Of course, they were only rumors. She'd never seen a quickie happening. But that many rumors couldn't all be wrong. So maybe the people who represent Pergamum are believers who refrain from evil, but permit people around them to commit sexual sins. Jordan sighed and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Sadly, I think there's a lot of that in churches right now. I'm not for fire and brimstone, but I wish they would stop preaching that anything goes. This whole if it makes you happy mentality definitely goes against God's teaching, and I think it's led many good Christians astray. She paused as if thinking back over her own life choices. Then she cleared her throat and met Kat's gaze again. "What about the Nicolaitans? Who are they?" Frustration coursed through Kat as she flipped back to Revelation. "I don't know. There's even fewer mentions of them. Some believe there was a man named Nicholas who was once a deacon, but then followed Balaam's path and encouraged people to sin by eating unholy food and committing sexual sins. Others believe that they weren't called from any one man, but from the Greek word Nikola, which means let us eat. Of course, the Left Behind series even stated that a man named Nikolai was the Antichrist. So regardless of who they are, their actions grieve God. But I don't know what we're supposed to do with this information. I wish Micah had given me more of a hint of how to do this." "Maybe it's not about the details," Jordan said. Kat's brows edged together, furrowing her brow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I get visions of people and what they need to hear. Does it matter if they represent Ephesus or Pergamum? You see lights of people being protected by angels, people you're supposed to witness to. Maybe the details don't matter, and we need to just focus on that." A piece of Kat knew Jordan was right. She was focusing on the details, partly because all of this was overwhelming. But there was a piece of her that knew the details might be important. Raven didn't seem like the type of girl to become a believer simply because Kat told her she needed to. No, she seemed like the kind who would need facts. The kind who would need to be told what would happen and then see it come true. And that's why Kat needed more information. She wanted to give Raven clear signs to look for, but she couldn't do it alone. She would have to find someone else who could clarify things for her. Jordan lay in the unfamiliar bed that night and tried to keep her tears at bay. They stung the back of her eyes in their effort to escape. It wasn't that she had left that much back in Texas. A few friends, her overbearing mother, the son whom she'd given up for adoption. No, it was exactly what she'd told Kat tonight. She was feeling regret, and if she were honest, a little anger. Why did the rapture have to come now, before she'd really gotten to live life? Yes, she knew the Bible talked about how much better it would be in heaven, and she believed it. But she'd never be able to have a baby in heaven, never be able to hold one and rock them and watch them grow up. And that's really what was bothering her. She'd given up her son because she knew she wasn't in a position to raise him herself, but now she might never see him again, and she might never have the opportunity to have another child when she was prepared. She picked up her Bible and held it to her chest. She was so new to this, having only been a believer for less than a year. But holding the Bible had quickly become a source of comfort for her. Just the feel of the leather and the smell of the pages was usually enough to quiet her heart. With closed eyes, she whispered softly, "Lord, help me not to be angry and afraid." Her cell phone chimed with a message as she waited for peace. She tried to ignore it and focus on listening for the still small voice, but it was no use. Her mind refused to be still tonight. Cracking one eye open, she glanced at her phone to see who had disturbed her, and then opened the other when she saw that it was Jeremy. She'd met Jeremy on her flight to Washington from Texas, and he'd been like a guardian angel. The whole situation had been odd, especially because she generally shied away from men. Ever since the rape, she had an inane fear that every man was out to get her. It was often so overpowering that she would cross the street if men were coming toward her on the sidewalk, or run back to her car without accomplishing whatever task she had set out to do. Jeremy had been different. He'd sat down beside her at the airport and immediately put her at ease with his soulful eyes and kind smile. Then he'd taken care of her when they landed in Seattle, helping her navigate the crowds, reunite with her luggage, and he'd even secured her a ride to Olympia in the shuttle van. She'd felt so safe around him that she had given him her cell number, something she never did anymore. And they had texted back and forth the last few days. "How are you doing?" His kind words were exactly what she needed right now, but she did wonder how he knew. She thought about how to respond. They had discussed a lot about their lives during the time in the airport, but she hadn't told him the real reason she was here, or about her son. "I'm missing home." That seemed truthful, and yet vague enough. "Me too," came the reply. Jordan smiled and felt the tension ease off her shoulders. Talking to him was just what she needed right now. Raven tucked a strand of her midnight hair behind her ear as she regarded her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked good, fresh, like she was wearing no makeup, though in reality she was. Not a lot, but enough to give her a glow. A little eyeliner, a little blush, a dab of color on her lips, tiny pieces to make Jason notice her. Tonight was his shift at the bar, and she had every intention of going home with him when it was over. She exited her Jeep, pulling on her miniskirt as she did to readjust it. Then she gave her top one final glance in the reflection of the mirror and smiled. She looked good. As she spun to head toward the front door, a shadow crossed her vision. What was that? Raven peered into the darkness, suddenly wishing there were more lights in this parking lot. "Hello?" Her voice sounded scared and wimpy, not like her normal sassy self at all. She squared her shoulders and tried again. "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no reply, and after a moment the breath she hadn't known she'd been holding spilled out of her lips. It was nothing. She was probably just tired. Her sleep had been restless lately. She'd always had vivid dreams, but the last few days she'd been having some crazy nightmares. Only she couldn't remember them when she woke up. All she could remember was her heart racing and fear flooding her body. Yes, that had to be why she was seeing things. She was just tired. There was no other explanation for it. She took a deep breath, gripped her purse tighter, and entered the bar. The dim lighting gave the place a relaxed air, but the hum of conversation made the atmosphere lively. Couples and groups filled the tables that occupied the room, but thankfully there were a few open spots at the bar, which was where she wanted to be anyway. She sidled up to the bar and leaned seductively on the edge while she waited for Jason to notice her. His eyes rounded as he turned and caught sight of her. "Raven, what brings you here?" He looked different in his barkeep attire. The black button-down shirt was so different from the t-shirt he wore at the gym, but she could still see the definition of muscles beneath the sleeves. And though seeing more of his skin at the gym was sexy, there was something about the professional attire that appealed to her even more. Raven used her sexiest voice as she answered. "You do, actually." She bit her bottom lip and batted her eyes at him. "I thought I'd grab a drink and see if you were doing anything after your shift." The muscles in his jaw twitched. "I'd like that, but I have an early training session at the gym tomorrow, so I've got to hit the hay as soon as I get off." A training session on Sunday? She supposed it was possible. She'd seen his cards around the gym advertising personal sessions, and she knew he was trying to squirrel away more money. Maybe that's what she needed to do, schedule her own personal session with him. She certainly had the cash and the time. "I understand. Do you just have one tomorrow, or could you fit me in as well?" She normally didn't like spending money to get a man's attention, especially since they never lasted long. But this would not only get her some time with Jason, but improve her kickboxing skills as well. 2 for 1. "I can fit you in at noon, if that works for you." His lips pulled into a smile, displaying his one physical flaw, a crooked tooth. Normally, perfect teeth was a must for her, but Jason had so many other positive attributes that she chose to ignore it and focus on his eyes instead. "I'll make it work. So how about that drink?" "What's your poison?" "Tequila. Straight." She slid onto the bar stool, enjoying the look of surprise that graced his features at her order. Men always underestimated her, and she enjoyed shocking them. It was too bad she wouldn't get to show Jason her other surprising talents tonight. But tomorrow wasn't that far away.